We live in an age of shouting, but at our best, Americans argue out our differences, pushing ourselves compromise by compromise to a better place. That's why at NorCal News Now, we believe in a different kind of political talk show. On NorCal News Now, we welcome activists and opinion leaders, office holders and candidates from local city council members to top statewide and nationwide office seekers. We talk to them like they're humans, and we expect them to leave their talking points at the door and talk to us and our audience like we're humans too. We believe in unvarnished, in-depth, wide-ranging discussions on a whole host of different topics. Handmade in Northern California, our show is not actually handmade. We make it with professional cameras and microphones like every other broadcast show. We are, after all, not cave people. You can find NorCal News Now on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, our website, on your favorite podcast feed, and on ancient communication technologies like smoke signals and television, but not smoke signals. I think by this point you can see we're a little bit different. So give us a shot. NorCal News Now, a political talk show at the intersection of politics and real life. This episode is sponsored by the North State Labor Federation AFL-CIO, promoting social justice for working people in our community. We're in our community, we're working hard, and they're supporting us, so thanks, North State Labor Federation AFL-CIO.
On this episode of NorCal News Now, we're chatting with Chico Vice Mayor Alex Brown. I'm your host, Mike Richman.
And I'm Aaron Haar.
You are Aaron Haar.
And that's it.
That's good enough for me, man.
Unbought, unbossed. That's the way we like it.
That's the way I like it too, man. How you been?
I've been great. Great to have Alex Brown here. I wasn't able to be on the show last time she was
That's
here,
right.
so I was very happy to be here now.
That's right. Well, let's intro our guest on today's show. As we mentioned, Alex Brown. She's a marketer and a business developer, a writer and a musician, and she is the relatively newly elected vice mayor of the city of Chico. So Alex Brown, welcome back to NorCal News Now.
Thank you so much for having me. All those descriptors make me sound like a millennial.
That's well, you are kind of more. Yeah, I mean, that's right. That's
and
right.
such a talented millennial.
That's right.
So smart. I was afraid during your election that maybe the name and your talents and things that they would be looked past, or you wouldn't reach the voters with how really bright and intelligent you are. And first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
I was a little bit worried. I mean, I thought you were an extraordinary candidate, but I didn't think, as I looked at the things, I really hope she comes in third or fourth, or I really hope she is in there. You blew away the numbers. How did you do it?
How did I do it? Well, as a first-time candidate, who's never been in the political sphere, at least publicly, you don't know how things are going to shake out. And jumping into this and starting this journey, I kind of did it with the thought in mind that this is an experience. It's a valuable one, and it's my chance to try to make a difference. No matter how it shakes out, I knew I was going to learn a lot in the process, which I did. What I didn't necessarily expect is to come out first. And I think that can be attributed largely to the team that I had behind me. I transitioned from Tammy Ritter's Butte County Supervisor campaign to being a candidate, and that really was the core of the strength behind me. Tammy was, one of my right-hand team members. Angela Cook, her previous campaign manager, was my campaign manager, and so we started with a really strong core, and they really taught me the ropes of how to do this. And as the momentum picked up and we participated in forums and we were holding events, it just became so clear how ready all generations of people were to open the door for a younger leadership at the city council level. And I felt so held and supported that entire time. And my faith and my momentum continued to build throughout the campaign to the point where by the end of it, by that last day, I think we have a really good shot at this.
And when you saw the numbers come in, I mean, what was going through? How proud? Because, and then give us a little scoop. Was it direct mail? Was it straight, directly talking to voters? You know, was it some technology used? How did you do it?
You know, it's always hard. You kind of like dip into all the different pots of what makes a successful campaign. So I don't know that I could particularly name it, except to say we had a ton of folks knocking doors for us. And based on Tammy Ritter's campaign, I know that the door knocking, the direct contact with voters, telling them about my platform, whether it was me knocking those doors or a volunteer knocking for me, that is a big part of what built that momentum. I think the mailings helped a lot too, because it gave people an opportunity to learn what I stood for, not just who I am, you know, the policy priorities that mattered to me. I heard from a lot of folks, I like the policies you stand for. And so I think just the clarity of that message and showing up in all these different forms was really what ended up getting my name out there the most, in addition to, you know, some of the support I had from larger organizations that were doing that for me.
Yeah, and knowing, I mean, and having you and your team knowing the area, the constituency really well, and knowing these issues again and how to motivate people and what people were looking for in leadership on the city council.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think another part of it is because of the leadership behind me, I knew that we were going to have to work really, really hard to reach voters, work really hard to get as many endorsements as possible, and that paid off in the long term. And we had a really clear strategy for how we were going to do that. The messaging was on point, and I think because I had so many people on my team that knew what this area needed, and because I had such an up close and personal experience of it being on Tammy's campaign, it just became a lot easier to speak to the issues.
Right. And now that you're on the city council, what would you say now that you've been on the city council? Well, it's been 4 months or so now, right? Since you were inaugurated. What would you say maybe has surprised you in kind of the way the inner workings of this council is, and things that you've been happily surprised by, maybe not so happily surprised by? What did you not expect when you took this on?
So when you're campaigning, you're talking to a very specific segment of the population. You're those folks that you know are likely to support you and support your policy priorities. Then you're elected and you represent a much broader segment of the population. We flipped the council from a conservative majority to a progressive majority. And I think what surprised me, or what I maybe didn't expect or have a concrete idea of, is how much pushback there would be for that kind of steering the ship in a different direction, really looking at some progressive policies and progressive approaches. There are some folks that aren't happy about that, and just navigating that world between the folks who, you know, maybe don't agree with that direction, and honoring them and listening to them, but staying true to what we know is going to work. That's been a big one for me. I think there's also just so many things to learn about how the city operates and the things that we're responsible for, and the best approaches to addressing it. So I think I've been in learning mode in such this big way since I've been elected, and I've thought of it, I've had to kind of structure it in my mind as this is a new job, right? So you're learning all these new things when you start a new job, and figuring out how things work and how people work, and the relationships you want to develop, and that's the space I'm in, just learning.
Yeah, and I mean, it strikes me that, and I've talked to now on this show many people that run for office and are holding office, and it strikes me, I'm sure you've seen this too in your much lengthier career working with candidates. You know, you run, as you say, and you speak to your constituency, and then you get elected, but then you have to govern with everybody. I mean, you have to really be able to understand what people want, not only people that didn't vote for you, but to be able to accommodate other viewpoints. Yep. That can't always be an easy thing necessarily to do, but it's part of the job, right?
Absolutely, and just figuring out what compromise looks like and what engaging in those conversations in a productive way looks like. It's one of the hardest things and probably one of the most exciting things about the process, just being able to connect with and learn from people who I may not otherwise have interacted with in another life.
And they teach you and you teach them, and,
exactly.
and you kind of come to conclusions about how to govern the city.
Absolutely.
It's a big city. I mean, it really is. I mean, you think about it. I always think about Chico as a small town, but it's got a lot of people here, a lot of different interests here, a lot of business, and there's different people that you need to consider.
Yes.
So how soon after the election did you, and this is, I'm interested in this because I don't really know. I mean,
Sure.
you can maybe educate
this.
Educate me. Give me some education.
Yeah.
So how soon after you were elected did you say to yourself, listen, I want to not just be a city council member, but I want to be vice mayor? And what's the process like? And then also, what do you do? I mean, what's the job other than just being a council member? What's the additional work you do as a mayor or a vice mayor?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say it was not on my radar when I was running to be the vice mayor of the city of Chico. I really started to learn about what that process looked like, and that your colleagues nominate you and vote on whether to select you for that position right at the end, toward the end of the election. For me, all that I knew was I was going to support my colleagues in selecting a progressive mayor, and didn't really know that I would be floated as the vice mayor in this situation. I think for me, I take it as a nod from my colleagues that they're happy to have me here and happy to have me representing a different demographic than has historically been on the city council, and I took it as a vote of confidence. Vice mayor doesn't, it doesn't necessarily add to my job duties, except there's a couple of things. The mayor tends to be the contact for media or public relations type of things. The vice mayor tends to be the secondary contact. If the mayor is unable to be present at council meeting, then the vice mayor would lead those meetings. And so it's really much more of a facilitation type of role than additional responsibility. We all have equal power on the city council, and it's not uncommon for the vice mayor to be kind of the mentee or the potential next mayor, and so having some opportunity to learn about that role.
And I think your colleagues did right by looking at the will of the voters and the vote and saying, this is pretty concrete here that the city has really spoken here, and we should respect that. So that's part of the process too.
I was pleasantly surprised and very appreciative that my colleagues would invest in that in the way the voters did.
Yeah, and I think that's important to realize that, again, the council is a team. I mean, you have different viewpoints and things, but you work together as a team. And you reach out across the aisle. I mean, we've seen it. I mean, you've been to probably more meetings than I've been on this new council. But I mean, there's conflicts. I mean, certainly people step up in the community and have opinions about things, and the council members respond from their views, their inherent viewpoints. And there's conflict. I mean, I think that certainly you all on the council work it out, and you present something of a unified front. But there's got to be, obviously, behind the scenes, I mean, not to talk about the Brown Act or anything, but I mean, behind the scenes, certainly when you all are talking about things, there's certain things that come up that you need to navigate and make sure that you find ways to support the community and your own belief systems, right?
Absolutely. And, for me, entering into this role, and I think it was the effort or the goal of all of my colleagues to really start to change the way that council interacted with each other and interacted with the public, which up until election night was a pretty contentious environment. And we've seen contentious at our council meetings since the election. But one of I would say my core goal is just always to treat my colleagues with respect. And so there have been dialogues at the dais publicly about issues that we don't agree on fundamentally. And I think if we my personal goal in terms of shifting that culture is to really communicate in a way that I would be proud to look back on and watch again, and know that I did my best to engage thoughtfully with my colleagues and the public. Behind the scenes, I can't say that I've witnessed a lot of contention or conflict, but I really think it does happen in the public's eye when we're having the bulk of those discussions and getting into the details a lot more.
Yeah.
4 years, I mean, we did see a lot of contention on the council. And I think from the public standpoint, it started to really erode the institution and people's faith in the institution.
Absolutely.
And overwhelmingly, the city, Mike, voted for a change. And I think part of that change they voted for was back to a civil, civil discord, a respect, and a sense of professionalism without this back and forth logjam. And they really voted for a solution-based governance. So, And speaking to that, what was kind of the state of things as you took over? I mean, it's not, you weren't handed everything intact, really. So kind of what, for 4 years, things went how they were, and now you've kind of inherited things, and the roads are kind of damaged. Yep. We've had this horrendous post-camp fire and this terrible tragedy of our neighbors, and a community trying to support that, and we really put politics aside, and we're compelled, both sides, to put politics aside. And it seems like you were sworn in, and the next day you were to blame for everything of the last 4 years of the city. So
so it's an interesting dynamic, right? So do I know whether that would have happened if the campfire hadn't occurred or not? I don't know. But I think the sense of urgency and the sense of tragedy that came November 8th really heightened people's emotional responses to all of the issues, right? The things that were issues pre-campfire. Our police and fire are understaffed. Our roads are in poor condition. We have had a very low vacancy rate now, which is essentially zero. And so I think more than anything, the influx of people from out of the area and the kind of trauma and tragedy that impacted our area simply, brought those things out into the light and enhanced or increased the urgency or the sense of urgency that people had around them. But it's hard, right? You step into office and there are all these issues that already existed, and no clear road, no pun intended, to fixing them. And so you just have to chip away and see what you can do. And I think that's the best we can do.
I don't have to tell you, as a political operative, Mike, you really use that as opportunity to, and it's sad to see that could be what's going on, but you you use that as an opportunity to stir the fervor, to add fear and divisiveness, and at a time where we still should be putting politics aside and really working towards solution-based governance.
It's really hard, right? There's some convenient messaging from around what this council is setting out to do and can do. We know some of the issues that were contentious prior to the election are still contentious now, like addressing homelessness. And I think we've got a council now who's really looking at evidence-based strategies to intervening in that issue, whereas the previous council was not using those same tools in the toolbox. And so, we are in a state of crisis and really just trying to address it in the most strategic and data-informed way that we possibly can. But it's a hard set of issues to chip away at.
And you have facts coming from the police chief, and you have facts coming, but then you have media's role, and media can take one man's opinion and post it as a consensus fact with no statistics backing those. To people out there who say, what are we going to do for the crime has gone down 28%, but their violent crime has had an increase. What is, I heard another council member speak to this, but what is the current situation with the police force? Are there new officers coming on board? Where are the facts that lay right now as far as that goes?
So a couple of things. I want to backtrack a little bit just about that violent crime increase data. While all other forms of crime essentially have decreased, violent crime has been shown to have increased. But I'm a domestic violence advocate. It's been kind of my major background in violence prevention and response. And what struck me in that, and learning about some of that data, was that domestic violence is the most significantly increased violent crime that's being reported to the police. And so for me, that stands out specifically, and really wanting to dig into that more and learn a little bit more about what we can do to address it. Because if you pull domestic violence out of the violent crime data, it's a really staggering increase in that. And the way that we respond as a community to domestic violence is very different than the way that we respond to other types of violent crime and opportunistic crime and things like that. So I think it's a more nuanced conversation than that, and I just want to make a note of it.
Yeah, is that attributed to post-traumatic stress from things, or just?
So there's so many things that we always shy away from saying like this caused the abuse, right? But it does create conditions where stress is higher. Obviously, traumatic responses are higher. People are, living in more enclosed spaces. They're, they're no longer in their home environment, right? Or they're dealing with these increases in population and a lot of different crisis situations. So it does create an environment where people who have abusive tendencies may be more likely to act out on them. It also creates an environment where we're a lot more condensed. So somebody may be more likely to witness and to be an active bystander and report domestic violence incidences. So you can interpret a lot of different things from that data, but I think we need to pay more attention to it.
Right.
Yeah.
But to your question about what we're doing with regards to public safety, my understanding is that in the upcoming budget session, we're looking at swearing in 7 additional police officers, which is I think a more significant increase than we've had in a while.
Yeah.
And so again, trying to get our police force fully staffed so that we can address the influx in people and the subsequent increase in some of those crimes. I think we're working on addressing it.
Mm-hmm. And what, we talked about some of these effects of the campfire, and some of these things that everybody sees. There has been these crime upticks a little bit. Certainly the infrastructure, we see some of the impact on the roads, and traffic, things like that. Housing crisis, of course, we understand that. What are some of the more maybe subtle things that you see, that the data that you guys gather and have on the council that you communicate out to the community when you're in a meeting, or you try to use the media to share? I mean, things that people are being influenced by, but maybe they're not as aware of, and they need to take a step back and say, oh yeah, that's another maybe effect of the campfire.
I mean, homelessness is a key word that kind of comes up. Consistently, I'm hearing, and the point in time survey will likely bear this out, and the data that the number of people experiencing homelessness in our community increased significantly post campfire. So once again, exacerbated a problem that already existed and had not been dealt with in a strategic way. And now we're in this kind of crisis mode of we need shelter beds. We need to create a system or coordinated system between our service providers to get people shelter beds, services, and then housing is this massive gap that we're going to have to address at some point. And so I think that issue has definitely increased. You mentioned infrastructure, but I think traffic is a key component for folks. If you think about it in terms of the general plan and what the general plan sets out to do, we are in 2030 population levels, which means any project that we had planned in the general plan before we got to those population levels were there, right? So we're already way behind in terms of infrastructure and traffic mitigation measures and things like that. So, I mean, there's that. And I think there's just, I would never want to underestimate the impacts of trauma, and not just primary trauma, right? People who had to, who survived the campfire and had to evacuate, and people who lost their homes, but the secondary trauma that our community in a big way has absorbed, right? Being around folks who have had these experiences and opening our homes to them, that has a major impact on our psychology and our well-being, and I think it definitely impacts the way we engage with each other. So you can feel that. You can feel some of that tension, especially as we're talking about where are we going to put trailers, where are we going to build housing, those types of things. It can't happen fast enough, and that, I think the urgency in a large way comes from, our county just experienced a major tragedy and a major trauma. Is
it possible or even necessary maybe to tease out how much of these influences come from the people that are refugees from Paradise? Or like I said, does not even matter. I mean, you deal with what you have in front of you as a community. But I mean, does the point in time survey, for instance, is there an ability to understand what percentage of those are people from Paradise? Yeah, and so I'm a member of the Continuum of Care, which is the body that puts that survey out and facilitates and manages it. And there was some pretty strategic effort to add questions into the point in time survey, which is the count, a 1 day point in time count of the people experiencing homelessness in our community, and it explores all the different reasons that they might be homeless, et cetera. And so it informs us in a big way. There was a section that was added specifically related to, are you homeless, are you experiencing homelessness by virtue of a disaster? And if the answer to that question is yes, then it goes into some more specifics about different fires around the area, specifically the campfire. And so I think we're going to see in the data, based on that count, how the campfire has influenced that increase or that influx. Exactly.
Now, the last council, they put in ordinances. They tried a different way, let's say, of trying to solve a problem, and it seems like the problem just sort of got worse over 4 years. I mean, this is pre-fire, but they did one thing before they kind of closed down and things switched, and they declared a shelter crisis. Yes. And that was really important. So let's talk about that, and then where this council is kind of compelled because of that decision to go.
Yeah, I think that decision was incredibly important because it really laid the foundation for some of the work that's yet to come. One of the first decisions that I got to make on council was to approve the land to be used for the Chat's tiny home villages, and so without the declaration of a shelter crisis, we would not have been able. Chat is not able or would not have been able to move forward with that project.
The Chico Housing Action Team.
Yeah, yes, Chico Housing Action Team, who was doing Simplicity Village, which is a series of tiny homes for older adults experiencing homelessness. So a housing first model with services available, and essentially creating community and getting people prepared to move forward with their lives. Really significant project, and without this declaration of the shelter emergency, we would not have been able to do that. We're making some decisions on low barrier shelter at the council level right now, and the shelter declaration gives us a little bit of flexibility in the types of buildings that can be used for sheltering and things like that. So it allows us to leverage some of the land we have, leverage some of the loosened restrictions on how things need to be built or put into place, so that we can really strategically address this issue. And really that has to come from the service providers. The shelter declaration also increased our access to some funding available to address homelessness and to prevent homelessness, which we're going to see that bear out. The COC just approved several projects related to housing and addressing homelessness. So I think we're moving in the right direction. And what we need the most, more than anything, is housing and beds. Right? We know that we do not have enough shelter beds to accommodate the amount of people who are experiencing homelessness in our community. And getting them through the door creates that relationship where we can start to address some of the other issues that they might be dealing with.
Now, do you have the support of public service agencies, the police, fire, first responders? Because it seems as though, we could deal a lot more with violent crime or gang crime, whatever
Sure.
it is, the more violent criminals out there, if the police aren't tied down with service calls to, people who can't go into a shelter and be kind of taken care of there and handled in a more humane way there, to having to go out to calls for that, it would decrease the calls, I guess is what I'm trying to say, and provide for better services from those departments.
Yeah, absolutely. The data consistently bears out, national data and, fortunately local data, bears out that ordinances, and I presume you're referencing sit and lie ordinance is, one of those that kind of facilitates a public safety response to people experiencing homelessness or people, existing or resting or sitting in our public spaces. The data bears out that is a costly way of addressing homelessness. It doesn't actually address any of the root causes. Rather, it kind of moves people around from area to area, which is likely why we've seen the issue only continue to grow. And it reduces the likelihood or the availability of our police resources to respond to crime. And so I think we do need to steer in a different direction and toward a more evidence-based strategy, because what we know is that partnerships with service providers is the number one and the most effective and cost-effective way to address homelessness, because they know the population, they have the services to provide, and those relationships can get built that way.
Now, that being said, and let's speak to, I'll try to take I'll try to take the opposite point of view here. Now, if we had enough shelter beds, could then we go to some ordinances?
Some people might fundamentally agree with that, but the data doesn't show that those ordinances are actually effective. So, there may be an argument for this can be our compromise now that we have enough shelter beds, but there are already laws in place for criminal activity. So if somebody's committing a crime, I would absolutely expect that the police would have an opportunity to intervene in that. But creating a crime out of sitting or lying, in a public space, the data doesn't bear that out. In addition to my personal belief that that's not a humane response to preserving human dignity and actually getting people connected to support. So it's an argument that could be made. It's not an argument that I would make.
Fair enough.
Can I ask you about an issue? Because there's an issue that you ran on.
Yep.
I think you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
That has come up in some of the city council meetings. The issue of cannabis
Yep.
licensing within the city limits for dispensaries and the like. And it's one again that you ran on, and that there's constituents here in the city that believe strongly that this should be pushed forward.
Yep.
I was at a meeting where there were a number of people at the meeting, a number of citizens who said, "Why are we wasting our time on this issue? We don't need to deal with this right now. There's other things going on.
Yeah.
Why are we spending precious time in a meeting talking about this?" How would you respond to that?
So I think that anytime you're going to talk about this subject, there's going to be an emotional response to it. There's specific topics that elicit kind of a values-grounded emotional response, and it takes a little bit of grit to be able to just stick with the topic. And there's some really clear reasons why now is the right time from my perspective. The first of them is the voters have asked for it, right? So majority vote in Chico and in Butte County said we want licensing in the state of California. To me, when the voters speak that loud, that is the most representative sample of our community, of our voting population, that can tell us what they want and what they want to see happen. That's what makes it easy to start that conversation. As we're responding to so many of the kind of immediate impacts of the campfire, for which there is not necessarily a clear path forward, right? We're in a lot of ways we're writing the playbook on this issue, and there's there's time and there's resources that we don't have to spend on addressing a lot of the issues that have arisen or been exacerbated post-campfire. But there is a really clear path forward when it comes to cannabis regulation in the city of Chico. The state regulations are in place, which really give all businesses the blueprint for how they operate. And there's some key questions that the city of Chico needs to answer in order to allow those businesses to start to erode the black market, to bring some economic development opportunities, some really significant economic development opportunity to the city of Chico, and to provide access to people who have asked for it. Because that path forward seems so clear, and there's only a few questions that we need to answer, my answer to your question is why not now? Local governments and the nature of local governments is that we're focused on a variety of issues at a given time. We can respond to the campfire. We can look at ways to increase our housing stock, which is, that's its own kind of intricate set of things that need to happen in order for that to happen. We can focus on public safety. We can also address homelessness in a strategic and evidence-based way. We can also look at licensing businesses for cannabis for the purposes of economic development and access. And so for me, kind of understanding the nature of local governments in that way, it's a perfectly appropriate time to be having the conversation.
I mean, Mike, how long ago was Prop 64? What was it?
2016.
It was 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there's people who really get upset because they think this could have been 10 years of revenue that could have been brought to this city. And when you start to add those numbers up, it's easy to get frustrated with the fact that we have some things we need. And what is the real difference between a black market and a no black? It's happening. It's been happening. Yeah. And there's a lot of people I know who said this community was kind of built off of marijuana and the community surrounding. We're in a poorly, we're in a poor county, and a lot of people have found ways to make that economy work for them. And a lot of them have taken risks to do that. And there's a majority of them who want to come out from that. And there's a safety issue involved too of people buying it from whoever or wherever, and not knowing really the product of that you're giving. I don't see anything wrong with getting the revenue from that.
Right, and it's often the question becomes, or what I've heard in some different forums is, should we bring cannabis to the city of Chico or should we keep cannabis out of the city of Chico. And that's not the question that we should be asking, because cannabis is absolutely already here and operating in a very significant way.
Economically, a very significant way.
In the black market.
Sure.
We are paying for that, and we are not benefiting in any way from it. So moving toward regulation, moving toward licensing different types of businesses, the revenue piece is a part of it, and I believe we could use that revenue to address some of the problems associated with the black market and really start to push back on it. But the economic development piece feels so significant. Anytime you bring a new industry into a community, you're talking about jobs at all levels, and not just retail jobs for people working at a dispensary, but you've got a myriad of professional jobs, in all different types of field, from bookkeeping to scientists to chemists, right? Like, we are not acknowledging the wisdom in allowing those businesses to operate and bringing the opportunity for an economic increase in our community.
And if I'm hearing you loud and clear, the big takeaway, the point you started with, is the voters said they want this. Very, very clearly they spoke. And it's really a response to that. This isn't something that is coming up from the council to say, hey, we should do this and try to get something on an initiative on the ballot. This happened already.
And here's the thing, we're hearing at the national level, presidential candidates talking about legalization in the United States. We're hearing, and I'm hearing local folks saying, if this doesn't happen, we're going to put it on the ballot again. And so I think I see the writing on the wall that if we don't get ahead of this issue and in front of it and do it in the way that works and fits and using input from a variety of stakeholders in our community, it's going to happen anyway, and it's going to happen in a way that we don't prefer. And so it makes sense to start having the conversation, and I think there's several folks in our community who wish we weren't having the conversation at all, because it's not an easy conversation to have.
And
it's a paradigm shift.
Just to let our viewers know, you started there is now a committee that has been formed, an ad hoc committee?
Yeah, ad hoc cannabis advisory committee. We're in process of establishing
and it's
that.
got different stakeholders from all groups, the school district and people against and people for. And then there are some some criticisms coming from people and camps against that say the city is rushing this, and we need to put a referendum on this committee because this is rushed. Can you really rush anything in government? I mean,
No.
isn't that the problem? I mean, Mike and I talk about it a lot, because the process is instinctively to have disagreements, and in a way it's a beautiful thing, because you come up at the end with what you get, and it's a process, and how can it be rushed?
And what I learning all the time, right? When I submitted my proposal to consider this, I submitted it with a skeleton ordinance, right? There's nothing written into the ordinance about what we're doing. It was just doing some of the work for staff, so that all we had to do as a city is fill in some of those blanks. And I think that scared people. I think that's what kind of initiated that feeling of, oh no, we're rushing this, we're just going to pass an ordinance, which was never the goal, just to move an ordinance through. It was really to consider these questions, 4 of them. What type of businesses we allow, where we allow them, how many of any specific type do we allow, and are there additional conditions we want to place on those businesses in order to operate in the city of Chico that reflect our values more strongly than the state regulations already do. And that's really what we want to get down to. And I think that ad hoc committee is going to be really helpful in helping us shape that.
And we had Supervisor Bill Connolly on, Butte County Supervisor Bill Connolly, and they've really put some teeth in grows. He was getting phone calls a lot from people. He has a real unincorporated area where that sort of stuff goes on. But the county did. I mean, they did nothing gets rushed. It's a slow process, and it's intended to be that way, and it's beautiful. But the county did go ahead and allow for deliveries. And just leave it, you can have deliveries. So the county will allow deliveries, but even Chico won't, allow deliveries. So
it's a moot point at this juncture, because legislation just, something just got, a decision was just made that you can't ban deliveries from out of the area into a municipality or into a county. So there are legal deliveries happening within the city of Chico, because there is no
the word.
ability or authority to restrict access in that way. So it is kind of a moot point. We could allow delivery businesses to exist within the city of Chico and enjoy the revenue and the sales tax and all of that from those businesses. But at this point, other communities are benefiting from the market, not Chico.
I want to ask you something about and I don't want you to speak for the mayor, but there was a little. Can we use the term kerfuffle? Is that the right?
Love that term.
Shenanigans? Kerfuffle? I'm not sure what you're going to ask. So.
Well, there was a little bit of a kerfuffle, I guess, between the mayor, between Randall Stone, disagreement, and our assemblyman James Gallagher about a housing bill, and maybe you can explain a little bit. I'm just learning about this myself, so maybe you can kind of expose a little bit more exactly what the pushback was from the mayor to the proposal that Assemblyman Gallagher put forth.
Sure, and I can't speak for Mayor Stone, but I can say, what I've observed, which is that AB 430 came forward. There was not a whole lot of heads up to the city council, or to my understanding, to the cities that this would be impacting.
And this is a housing bill.
It's a housing bill. The way that it's kind of packaged is that it streamlines CEQA. There's a lot of other elements to it that I'll dig into, and I think that this is the purpose or the reason behind Mayor Stone's response to Assemblyman Gallagher. And Mayor Stone wrote a letter to the committee that was reviewing this bill, letting them know about his personal response and disagreement with it. I don't agree with the Assembly bill as it exists currently either. And my understanding is that it originally started as a CEQA exemption, which is exactly what Assemblyman Gallagher said. It eliminates or streamlines the CEQA process so that we don't have to go through it.
What is the CEQA process? It's environmental
review, state-driven environmental review of projects or developments. It's basically a mechanism for transparency. It says that you have to tell the community and be transparent about the environmental impacts that your development is going to have. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to do anything, but what can happen as it currently stands is that when those projects go through review by our planning commission and by the city council, we have some authority to put conditions on them. So if, for example, the environmental impact cannot be mitigated, then the city council and the people, by using their voice, have an opportunity to speak about whether that project fits in our community or doesn't. And what AB 430 does is it overrides our conditional land use authority. So the opportunity or the process by which these projects have to go through and be vetted through local municipalities in order to move forward. So it's a much bigger impact than just the environmental impact that CEQA kind of seeks to
building
mitigate.
codes and different things. Is this? I mean, I'm not totally worried, but it's like, I don't know if we want shanties and matchstick buildings put up in our town and on dirt. There's regulations in place to make sure that things have quality and are safe for people to live in.
And it's not as much the quality aspect that I think would be threatened, but the process that we have exists for a reason. It exists so that there's checks and balances in place. It exists so that the people and the elected officials that they voted into office have an opportunity to use their voice to decide how our community grows. And according to our general plan, what we should really be focusing on is dense development, affordable housing, infill projects, smaller units. That's what our community needs and what's laid out in our general plan. But this bill would allow for, I'm not going to say unfettered development, because it's, there's certainly some restrictions in place, but it takes the people's voice out of that process. And that, for me, is a major concern. And it does that for a period of 10 years or more.
So like the Green Line, for instance, could they just say, hey, you have no land rights now, we're going to build out here?
No, not as it stands. There are protections for identified, environmentally sensitive lands. So the Green Line would be included in that.
And I'll speak for Mayor Stone.
Please.
Thank you, Mayor Stone.
Please.
You're a really great mayor. I think 2,700
There's a lot.
Low income homes, low income housing.
I'm not 100%
Units.
sure on that.
2,600 middle income units, and then going from there. So kind of writing a letter to, I think, McCarthy and to Governor Newsom saying, and I hope I'm right, saying, hey, we're kind of good.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't want to, we can't really take, like you said, 2030, 2040 right now.
Right.
And I think we have a plan. We have a good plan in place that has growth and it really has some teeth and some homes going in.
Right.
And I think we're good.
Right. I think what you're speaking to is that we do have a lot of projects that have gone through all of the city permitting processes and are, ready to go, that just haven't been actualized, right? So, including developments that are currently taking place in our community. So I think he was addressing that we are moving forward with quite a few projects, and that the barriers that might be in place at the city level have already been, addressed. I think what we really need at the local level is to start talking about or thinking about how do we incentivize the type of housing that we need, not and completely waiving environmental protections or the public process by which these projects have to go through, but how do we tell the community these are the types of projects that we want, and these are the incentives that we're going to give in order for those projects to be actualized in accordance with our general plan. Right? That's the document we should be referencing.
Certainly, as a millennial, you can understand back, 4 or 6 years ago, we had the first-time home buyer, grant here, and what incredible opportunity that was for people to, basically have a chance to go in and get in. And I'm hearing from people, young married couples, young professionals of like, I am never going to live this dream. I'm never going to be able to do this. It's a myth.
Well, in this market in particular, it's really begun to ramp up very quickly and get away from people to be able to
it's
get
almost
in.
like homeowners kind of feel guilty. You have people that lost their home. You have people that aren't in a position to get a home, and you're like, oh yeah, look at my yard, and it's like, oh, I wish I had a yard, And it kind of doesn't create the community that we kind of want, where we're continuing to, see people progress and grow and enter our tax base.
Right, and invest
and
in
our
our
property
community,
tax
right?
base, yes.
We have to be thinking about it from all levels. So we need all types of housing, but the dense development, the smaller units, would account for some of those people just entering the workforce, or more entry-level employees at local businesses, which I'm hearing are having trouble accessing housing. We need workforce housing so that the larger businesses that are seeking to expand in our community have an opportunity to recruit quality employees. We have a university on campus that we struggle from brain drain once students graduate for multiple reasons, including you can't find a place to live that's going to be affordable. And one of the impacts of the campfire, the secondary impacts, are that we have a thriving and booming housing market now, which means that people who've previously rented to tenants are selling their homes, and then those renters no longer have a place to be. So we need rental housing in addition, right? So it really is a complicated network of things that we need. And
let's be clear, the builders deserve to make some money. I mean, certainly. I mean, we want them to be able to.
It takes a lot to invest in a project.
Well, sure, and they should be able to have a fair return on that investment. Nobody's saying that they shouldn't. It's just that.
So how do we incentivize that? How do we say, okay, this may not bear the fruit that this other type of projects does? How do we help it succeed and be successful and be worth it for you? It takes collaboration, and I think that there's going to be some things that we start discussing that hopefully open that door.
Yeah, well, like everything else in city government, I mean, as you've learned and you've told us and talked to us about, I mean, it's balance.
Yes.
It's a balancing act between really the competing interests of everybody and making sure that it's equitable for the entire community.
Yeah, so just to circle back to AB 430, as written, it is a bit of an overreach, right? To say that for a period of 10 years or more, the city and the public has no say in how we grow, and to to kind of override that process, that sends a strong message to our community. And we're here to advocate for our community and the people, and our process exists so that they can have a say and a voice in that matter. So we have to find the balance, and as it is, it does not allow for that balance.
Well, Alex Brown, thanks for joining us again on NorCal News Now. As always, very educational, interesting, hopefully for the viewers as well to learn and see you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
We'll have you back again soon.
I'll look forward to it.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Well, we're going to turn now to the latest segment on our show, Union Spotlight. This is the place where we talk about local unions and their efforts to support workers. And today's guest on Union Spotlight is David Welch, a retired RN, a member of the California Nurses Association, and a trustee with the North State Labor Federation, AFL-CIO. So David, welcome to NorCal News Now.
It's a pleasure to be here, always.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, David, thanks a lot for coming in and being here. Really appreciate you stopping by and talking to us. I've been seeing today on social media the huge outpouring of support and unions down in Sacramento for the Sacramento teachers strike. And my goodness, just streets and streets full of people and great union support. You're with the North State Labor Federation, one of our sponsors of the show, a very proud sponsor of ours. And that's kind of the motto, right? Unions supporting unions, and really just talk about kind of the energy that's going on, not only in Sacramento, but across the country.
Yeah, I think there's something really important going on there in the background. I haven't paid myself really close attention to the precise issues in Sacramento, but they've been sort of the same all over the country. And there has been this extraordinary wave of teacher activism, including in states where there's very little union tradition, very little union strength, where there is conservative government that's very unfriendly to unions, and teachers are just lately being the ones to step up and take an extraordinary role in that. And it has, I think, helped to energize the rest of the labor movement. And teachers have struck in places like Kentucky and Oklahoma and Arizona and so on, and really with a focus on the quality of education, not merely a focus on their own compensation or benefits, but a focus on having the resources that they need to really do a good job for their students. And I think that's one of the key things that's been important about that, and important in keeping the community support and building the community support. And the teachers have consistently across all of those events in those different states have had an amazing level of community support. And that's been a really exciting thing. And I think sometimes where the labor movement has occasionally gone astray a bit, it is in getting too narrowly focused on our own workplace concerns, and not focused enough on the concerns of the broader working class, one might say, the broader needs of society. And I think the fact that the teachers have really kept the focus on the quality of education and the ability to do a good job for their students has been a big part of the strength of what they have been doing there. I think in a way that's something I've always been very proud of with my own union, with the California Nurses Association, is that we've kept a strong focus on what is best for patients. And also, as it works out very nicely, I mean, realistically, what's good for patients is generally good for nurses too. Having an adequate number of nurses on the job makes the nurse's workday much more reasonable. It also makes the patient care a lot better, and literally saves lives in the hospital. So I think when unions keep that kind of focus on the needs of society, the needs of the people we serve, the needs of the working class, I think that's where we connect best with the community.
Yeah, it's definitely something like seeing teachers, a lot of teachers working paycheck to paycheck.
Oh, yeah.
And the joke I made last week about, well, my son's really struggling, he's living paycheck to paycheck. Well, tell him to get an education. Well, he's a teacher. And,
yeah, right.
In Colorado, when they saw administrators getting 7-figure salaries and just kind of said enough is enough, maybe those aren't the same problems that flew in LA to San Francisco and now Sacramento and the Oakland teacher strike. But yeah, it's a good segue into healthcare because healthcare is a big part of those, those expenditures for working families.
Right.
And this week, Senator Bernie Sanders, some other people came out with a brand new Medicare for All bill. Let's talk about that. And how do you feel like? Obviously, I imagine the California Nurses Association would be supportive of that. I hope. But let's talk about that, and we could talk about. Unions don't always agree. There's sibling rivalry among unions. And,
sure, at times.
Yeah.
And, well, again, as a nurse, healthcare is obviously the issue that is closest to our hearts as an organization and to mine personally. Been something now that I've been involved in for quite a few years. And really the struggle to create a healthcare system in America that really works for people first and foremost, and for human need first and foremost, as opposed to for the profits of drug companies, insurance companies, whatever. And so I was excited to see, as Senator Sanders was there announcing the new version of the Medicare for All bill, that one of my friends and co-president of the California Nurses Association was standing next to him there as he announced that. So, that's something we've been involved with for a long time. And I do believe it is something that just absolutely has to come in this country, both from the standpoint of sort of the moral standpoint of what's right to do, but also from the standpoint of what's practical to do. We have by far the most expensive healthcare system in the world by a big, wide margin, and we don't come anywhere close to having the best quality of care in the world, and we don't come anywhere close to covering all of our people. Even though the Affordable Care Act made some progress in that direction, it's still a long ways to go. A lot of people still uncovered, and a lot of people who are paying more for insurance than they can afford, and still having co-pays and deductibles that are bigger than they can reasonably handle. And so we really need to change that whole dynamic, and there's really no way that just tinkering around the edges of the system is going to accomplish what we need to accomplish. We need to go to something very different than what we have now, which is really taking the good, familiar Medicare that we depend on to care for our seniors, that I'm happily on now since I retired, that does a great job and is the most efficient, most effective part of our healthcare system, and expanding that model to cover everybody. And that's really what it's about.
And I've heard some Republicans this week come out and say, well, it's gonna end up like Canada, and people are gonna wait so long, and people are coming from Canada down to America to get their health care, and coming down here to get their prescription drugs. I just think this is entirely false.
Yeah, it's largely a myth. There's, they come up with a lot of anecdotal stuff about that, and the only real study that's ever been done of this was several years ago now. But some basically Canadian health economists really decided to do a serious study of this and surveyed a large number of Canadians. And remember that most of the population of Canada, just because of the geography, most of the population lives pretty close to the U.S. border.
That's right.
So they're relatively close access. And they found that on the order of 0.5% of Canadians had ever gotten health care in the United States. And of those, only about 20% of those who had gotten health care in the United States, of that 0.5%, only about 20% of those had actually traveled to the United States for that purpose. The other 80% had been traveling in the United States when they needed health care and needed to get care while they were here. Just for a comparison, roughly 5%, about 10 times as many of the population of California goes to Mexico for health care in any given year.
Yes, dental care and
dental care, glasses, buying their medicines, all those kinds of things.
And there's a lot of people taking advantage, Mike, in Canada of prescription drugs, going from America up to Canada. And I heard it was no surgeries. It was basically coming down here, I couldn't get an appointment, so I'm going to come down here across the river or whatever. But it never had to do anything with surgeries or big medical procedures. It was, and I tried to get an appointment in December, and they said, well, we got a slot in April. So I thought maybe I'd go to Canada or
Yeah,
Mexico.
we have plenty of long waits here. I mean, this is a bit of a, well, I don't want to go way into the weeds on healthcare policy, but that's not really the place for it. But we could, there's once you get me going on
We
that
have our
subject, I
issues.
can talk
We can
a lot.
agree
Yes.
on that for sure.
Well, let me ask you this, David. Talking about unions as an entity and as a force within society. I mean, we talked about kind of the moral high ground and some of these issues about teachers and what unions help, how unions help teachers and healthcare workers. Do you think that there needs to be a better job done, maybe communicating that moral high ground a little bit in terms of how unions do help not only the workers but also help provide better service and care to consumers within the systems?
And the fact that so much of what we are accustomed to in this society, whether it's everything from having overtime pay beyond things that are required by law now, but the reason they're in the law is that unions fought to put them in the law, and every one of those things when and where unions are weak, every one of those things comes under attack, and every one of those things is still subject to people who would like to take those things away. So, having weekends off, having holidays sometimes, having overtime pay when you work beyond a certain number of hours, having any degree of protections on the job, really all came out of the work of unions, and it's unions that fight to maintain those things. And there have been, as recently as the last couple of years, there have been bills introduced in state legislators to take away things like to eliminate child labor laws and things as basic as that. And so it is an ongoing fight. It's an ongoing fight that is mainly being fought by unions, even though only a small percentage of American workers today belong to unions. The work of union members benefits everybody who works for a living one way or another.
Yeah.
And so I think that's really critical. And when you look at, again, this is me, I want to get talking about statistics and things like that, but you look at a graph of from the 1940s to the 1970s, as the productivity of workers went up, the wages of the workers went up to match. As the value of our work went up, the compensation went up. Beginning right about 1976, there had been for a number of years, a really highly organized corporate conservative campaign against unions that began to make inroads, began to drop union membership, and as that happened, we see those two lines on the graph diverge. We see the productivity, the value of what workers produce is still steadily going up, and yet the wages are no longer going up to match, and that's where we see the huge income inequality that we see in this country today. The highest income inequality, the last time we had income inequality this great was about 1929, just before the Great Depression, and it's not an accident that that is happening there, because a society in which the average working person doesn't have the money to afford the things that they need, doesn't have the money to buy the products that they're producing, is not really a sustainable economy. And I think one of the best things we could do for our economy is get back to stronger unions again, more and stronger.
Yeah, that's a good future focus.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll get into it. But that's great. Thank you, Dave, for joining us on Union Spotlight. Always great to see
it's a
you
pleasure.
and have your opinion. You've been on the show once before, so we'll have you back again, I'm sure.
I would
at some
love
point
to.
in the future. It's always great to see you. Well, that's our show. But before we go, we'd like to thank our sponsor, the North State Labor Federation, AFL-CIO, which promotes social justice for working people in our community. And to learn more, visit online at northstatelabor.org. Thanks as well to David Welch for joining us here on Union Spotlight. And of course, we also appreciated Chico Vice Mayor Alex Brown for coming on earlier on the show. Don't forget that NorCal News Now is available wherever you download your podcast. So check us out and subscribe there. You can also check us out on Facebook. Like us on Facebook, please, and or subscribe to our channel on YouTube. So thanks to you all for listening in. We'll see you soon for another episode of NorCal News.